Fighting is the whole purpose of some man's life. They live for nothing but the thrill of encountering a strong counterpart. These men are not pure adrenaline heads, as you don't find them taking risks for the sake of it, but rather to actually seek out for the physical, mental, and spiritual boundaries set onto them. Welcome back to my series Understanding Evil. Today we'll be examining Zodd from Berserk, who is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. Make yourself some tea, some coffee, sit on your lazy ass and enjoy. Our first encounters with him are nothing but rumors about an immortal fighter, Nosferatu as they like to address him, a warrior that has been seen on multiple battlefields for hundreds of years. Naturally, lots of people question his existence altogether, as the existence of an almighty immortal warrior is otherworldly to us and hard to comprehend. The band of the Hawk, having to capture a castle, find themselves with severe losses of men as they keep sending troops in. So Guts himself decides to take a look at it himself in order not to risk any more of his endeared comrades. Entering the castle, he observes corpses and corpses being stacked onto one another. At the end of his sight, he notices a shadow of a gigantic creature, resembling a man. There he finds him, standing across the hall, a gigantic, muscle-bodied monster of a man, covered in blood. Guts, being who he is, decides to strike in order to revenge his lost ones. But he quickly realizes that whatever he's fighting here is not a near mortal. Something seems off about him. A beast in the form of man, packed with muscle, is towering over and staring at Guts. Though resembling an animal, he does not seem to be driven by sheer bloodlust. In fact, he even praises Guts as he's the first to be able to harm him. As an act of honor, he decides to reveal his true power, his true self, to Guts, and lets him witness the beast inside man's skin, Nosferatu Zodd. At first glance, you may think that Zodd is just an immoral, power-hungry individual who takes pleasure in the killing of the weak, but that could not be further from the truth. Zodd takes joy in the act of war, but sees no point in causing harm for the solitary pleasure of it. A case for that is Wild, an apostle committing heinous acts for the sake of it, whom Zodd despises and decided to murder with his own hands. Zodd despises Wild because he cannot come to terms with the results of his actions, and instead of accepting the consequences of his doing and facing death like the honorable warrior should, he begs for mercy and to have another chance. Thus Zodd ultimately decides to tear him apart. Wild's main driving force were the indulging of pleasure and pure gluttony, while Zodd's clear driving force is pride. He does not commit any unnecessary killing and lives off by a strong honor code. You do not see him committing heinous acts of abuse or trying to inflict as much pain as possible onto his opponents. The sole act of combat is what he's living for. His pride further translates into his self-image, as he insists on using polite languages even when communicating with his mortal enemies. Because despite their goals being the death of each other, he still profoundly respects, especially the strong. A close real-life counterpart to Zodd's ideology is the former fighting organization, ironically named Pride, as we had monsters of men taking their bodies to the limit and beyond in order to find the strongest among them. So an honorable, prideful warrior going his ways and beyond to fight the strongest there is. It may be violent, but it does not seem to resemble what most of us view as evil. But pride, my friend, is a big, deadly sin. Although his intentions are not as animalistic, cruel or hedonistic as most other apostles, his pride ultimately led to hundreds or possibly thousands of lives taken away throughout his hundreds of years of mercilessly killing his frontier enemies. Don't get it twisted, he still chose to kill off all these men with no feelings of regret or remorse. Zodd doesn't view his actions as evil, nor does he willingly want or rather care about causing harm to people. But all these men he killed had families, people awaiting them to come back. His intentions may have not been evil per se, but undeniably left traces of enormous devastation. Whether outcome or intent is what ultimately decides an action to be good or bad is an age-old and profound philosophical question. Let's examine Zodd from a Nietzschean and from a Platonian point of view, and we're going to start with the former. Zodd roughly fits the image of Nietzsche's Übermensch, somebody who freed himself from slave morality, as he calls it, and decided to go his own moral and spiritual path. Morality in Nietzsche's eyes is a concept created by the weak in order to survive amongst the strong. So the one seeking himself to be freed will ultimately destroy the weak, not by malicious intent, but by pure mechanical action of embracing one's strength. From a Nietzschean perspective, Zodd can be seen as formidable, as he decided to reject morality which was forced upon him for the sake of it. It made up his own purpose and code to live by. However, the flaw lies within his intent. The idea of rejecting given moral is to create a deeper set of morals yourself and elevate your potential to the fullest. Zodd's rejection of moral comes from the narrow pleasure of fighting. There is no greater goal or purpose, which can be seen as animalistic as it is purely based on physical assertion. Although its pursuit of strength can be very admirable, it can merely be boiled to an animalistic desire for power, which makes him to be a failed Übermensch. But his amor fati, or in English, love and acceptance of fate, and the embrace of suffering still holds up high in Nietzschean philosophy. So to sum it up, from Nietzsche's point of view, Zodd's actions are actually seen as quite formidable, as he simply decided to free himself from societal boundaries, from religious boundaries that were set upon him by other people, or that were rather tried to be set upon him. However, the flaw here lies not within his actions, but within his intent. There is no greater goal in mind, there was no real higher purpose for his actions. And his bloodlust, his love for fighting, is something that can be traced down to nothing but their animalistic roots, which again, it is admirable and formidable, but it simply does not qualify him to be a full Übermensch. Now let's look at the Platonian point of view. Plato has the term of a tripartite soul, made up of the rational, seeking truth and wisdom, the spirited, made up of courage and pursuing honor, and the appetitive, reasonable for carnal desires such as lust, food, and so on. In Plato's eyes, the rational has to govern the soul in order to achieve greatness and transcendence. That is his concept of justice, as a just individual will have a rational base to take action from. Zodd, however, is very obviously led by the spirited part of the soul, as his pursuit of honor fully took over his intent and actions altogether, which by Plato means he is an individual of injustice. His seek for strength makes him an unbalanced individual who completely neglects his intellectual growth for the sake of an admittedly greater carnal desire. In Plato's eyes, his existence is based on impulse and not any real virtue, and would finally be characterized as an auxiliaries, or in our today's day and age, a warrior. Strong, formidable, and courageous, but needing the guidance of philosophers, as his actions will else cause unjust. They require somebody to fill the void, the lack of virtue left inside them. And what do we observe later in the series? Him seeking guidance by no other than Griffith. So in Plato's work, Zodd's story just came full circle. From a Nietzschean point of view, Zodd will never ever qualify as a proper Übermensch because he simply lacks that internal moral high ground. He simply lacks that internal strive for greatness, beyond physical greatness that is, as Zodd wants to be a very strong warrior, rather already is, but you get the point. And from a Platonian point of view, he's simply somebody who heavily depends on guidance from above, which we ultimately see play out, which we actually see playing out in the series, as he at the end decides to bow to Griffith and simply does what Griffith tells him to do, meaning that he ultimately falls upon the guidance of somebody who's a greater thinker than he is. That is my conclusion for today. Thank you for watching and have a fantastic night, evening, or morning.